Ladies and gentlemen, if we take today's view on historical metronome marks seriously, then we run into absurd consequences, as we've seen for instance in last week's video. Nobody talks about this. But again, if a single beat metronome reading, so where one click correlates with a note value with one beat of the metronome mark, really was the historical truth, so to say, in reading metronome marks, then we simply have to assume that people played like that in the 19th century. Well, if you think that already is an absurd fact, then sit tight, because in this video I'm gonna bring you a story that goes well beyond that. We will have a closer look at Adolph Bernhard Marx, a very interesting and intriguing personality of the 19th century. Marx was born in 1795, he died in 1866, perfect contemporary of people like Karl Czerny and Ignaz Moscheles. In 1825, he became editor of the Berliner Musikalische Allgemeine Zeitung, which was one of the leading journals of that time. Very much appreciated by Beethoven, and especially the pieces that Marx wrote were very much appreciated by Beethoven. Also, he was a very close friend to Felix Mendelssohn, who got him an appointment at the Berliner Conservatory, where he stayed until he died. So Marx was a very influential personality. Connections to Beethoven, connections even to the late 18th century, and a few years before he died, he wrote an extensive book on Beethoven's Klavierwerke, so an interpretation or a guide, so to say, to Beethoven's keyboard works. And this book contains something that you really don't want to miss. I have here an original edition, first print 1863, but I will be quoting from the English translation made in 1894. And so in 1863, Marx was one of those old-fashioned conservative voices who have seen so much change in his life that he needs to comment on that. And in his book, he comments also about this increase of tempi. Increase of tempi compared to the old tempi that he still remembered from his younger years. Marx is talking about a subjectivity of tempi, that everybody has his own tempo, that the room can change the tempo, that the room can influence the tempi and things like that. But there is a general objective value that everybody has to look for. And then he says the following: it is true that even the old tempo marks have changed their measurements. The tempo is now taken much more rapidly. Mark continues like this: finally, it must be conceded that the argument in regard to tempo can never come to a close, because it is dependent upon subjectiveness, momentary mental conditions, etc. A general principle, however, remains, namely, the deeper and richer the content, the less does it allow haste. Just as for an address of a speaker who desires to press on to an important end, it is not fitting to use the tone of light, girlish talk. Each has its quality and its place. And now, before you jump into the comment section and say like, you see, tempo is subjective, all these metronome marks of the past, you know, you change them whenever you want, because Marx here clearly says it, and I will not deny that. Adolph Bernhard Marx here says clearly that tempo is a subjective thing. Everybody has his own taste. The room can change the tempo. The size of the orchestra can change the tempo, which is all true. Many people talk about that, but it's not what we research here. What we research here is the meaning of the original metronome marks. What does the half note 108 mean of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? Once you know that, it's up to you as a musician to decide what you do with that information, but we have then at least determined a certain departure. For us here at Authentic Sound, for the music productions we do, we stick really firmly, rigidly only almost, to the tempo given by the composer. For two reasons. We have enough evidence of that time that that's really what Beethoven wanted, that it's really what Schumann wanted, that it's really what Chopin wanted. Also, we have quotes like Karl Czerny saying that the smallest deviation of time destroys the entire meaning of a composition compared to what the original composer wanted. The full quote is given in last week's video. But again, it's something you have to decide what you do with that. We find it liberating. As for instance, in our 9th Symphony, guys, I don't want to stand still too long, but we received the 9 symphonies. We received the CD boxes. 350 almost are waiting to be shipped next week. And if you want to be part of that first shipment, use the code first shipping before Friday, June 7th, midnight Central European time. Then you get a 20% discount code not only on the Beethoven box but on everything we have to offer. And on top of that, you receive for free a Bandcamp subscription where you will find all the symphonies to download in high resolution and to stream for the rest of your life. Or at least as long as Bandcamp exists. So be part of this first shipment and just go over to our web store, but not yet, because you don't want to miss the twist of this story. We are almost there where we have to be. So we have Marx here talking about tempi that generally are sped up, but not so specific as we might want. He is more specific in another place of the book, however, where he is going to connect to two persons that he really appreciates and values enormously. Carl Czerny and Hans von Bülow. Also, there we find very clearly his rejection almost of applying a certain agility, dexterity, virtuosity in music by Beethoven. Let's listen. The constant appearance of new difficulties has led to the assertion that only virtuosos are able to perform Beethoven's works. But it would have been a lamentable circumstance for him and for us if we had been compelled to wait for these virtuosos, for only two have devoted themselves constantly and with earnestness to the work of presenting Beethoven to the lovers of art. The one was in Beethoven's own lifetime Czerny, who studied and performed the works under the master's own direction. The other is Bülow, who for years has, with virtuosity and highest intelligence, made Beethoven the center of his musical representations in crowded concert halls. Apart from these, as has also been remarked by Schindler, up to the present time, very few concert players and virtuosos have manifested intelligence for Beethoven's works. The very vocation of virtuosos proves that their aim is to shine technically. Hence, their greatest daily efforts are spent in the accomplishments of this, leaving very little time for other thought. Beethoven, though for a long time himself a concert player, said of virtuosos that, with agility of fingers, intelligence and emotion generally run away from these gentlemen. He was even of the opinion that increased mechanism in pianoforte playing would finally banish all truth of perception from music, a thought which, uttered in the comparatively innocent epoch of a Ries, a Hummel and a Moscheles, rings over into our times with the power of a prophecy. No, we must not be contented with waiting for virtuosos. Just think about this. Marx says virtuosos play music in a technically so demanding way that the only thing they can do is practice. Practice the notes. To achieve these speeds, they have no room left to think about the music. That's how much time they spent in practicing these pieces of Beethoven until they reach a certain level of technique, of speed, to bring these works on stage. And then the quote by Beethoven. I don't know if you know this quote. It's a very famous quote, but maybe you don't know it. And just think about it. This is Beethoven writing to Ferdinand Ries how much he is opposed to this mechanical way of playing, this kind of increased focus that already in his days started on technical performances, on technique, on speed, on scales, everything. Actually, his student Carl Czerny, he has a double role. He wanted to protect the history in, for instance, his Opus 500 by just describing how to play Beethoven's works in the right way. But on the other hand, he of course opened the entire modern school of piano. Liszt was a student of Carl Czerny, let's not forget that. But just as a side note, and this is not the story, the crux of the story is about to come. But just as a side note, how can Beethoven be opposed so much to mechanical dexterity when he marks his Hammerklavier sonata in tempi that we generally cannot reproduce today. So if we listen to the Hammerklavier Sonata, like for instance this fragment, you have to be aware that it's still slower compared to what Beethoven marked, at least if we view metronome marks in the way we do generally today, as a single beat marking. Well, that doesn't make any sense. How can you be opposed to mechanical playing, to virtuosity, to dexterity of fingers so much, even saying like emotion in music runs away as fast as these fingers of these players actually perform? How can you say that when that what we just heard is even under the tempo you want people to play in? Of course, we know the solution, that's the WBMP, the whole beat metronome practice. But now we're going to the next phase. Now sit tight, because the story gets to a certain point of absurdity, I would say, that you would, even if you're a strong supporter of whole beat, you would in a million years never have thought possible. Let's go. So Marx talks about the interpretation of all Beethoven sonatas in this book. And before that, we have a quite extensive 70-80 pages of general instructions of how to play Beethoven in general, like technique, melody, harmony, use of pedal and things like that. And then if you read that, it's very interesting. But you also have to keep in mind that these sources it's necessary to position these sources in the context of their time. You have to find other sources. You have to find earlier sources. This is 1863, so already second half of the 19th century. And even though persons like Marx, and we've seen Fink, we have seen Czerny, we have seen other sources, we have seen Moscheles, there are tons of sources, Hanslick, famous critic, these people comment on the increase of tempo. That was a general thing, that there was a massive increase of tempo, but there was also like a group of people that couldn't cope with that. But these people were conservative in safeguarding, so to say, the original thought, the original emotion, if you want, in the composition that they heard. But on the other hand, something like tradition, something like we keep everything as it was in Beethoven's time or as it was in Mozart's time, that didn't exist in the 19th century. Just to say something, if they really were strong in their belief that everything should be kept the same, they would still play in 1863 on the Viennese piano as we play in our studio, like in 1816 Fritz, for instance, or a Walter or whatever. But they didn't. They went along with instrument building. They went along with the new way of playing. There were just certain facets, and tempo was a major thing in that they apparently didn't want to adapt. And even in Marx's case, we've just seen, like, he acknowledges the fact, he goes much further, he gives much more liberty to the player by saying like everybody has his own taste, there is a certain subjectiveness or subjectivity to determining the tempo, what you like, the room and whatever. That was much more strict, I think, in the Viennese time. But again, we talked about that. I'm not going to repeat that. But now we come to a passage that needs no interpretation. Whatever Marx's opinion was in use of fingering and use of tone and use of legato and use of whatever, this leaves no doubt. He's going to be very specific in how much faster virtuosos of his time played certain pieces of Beethoven. And this will lead to a conclusion that is both laughable and absurd, and will make you rethink, even if you are a strong opponent of what we claim here on this channel for whole beat to be something that was a reality of the past, even if you are a strong disbeliever of that, this passage, if this doesn't reflect, if this doesn't trigger you to rethink that position, then probably I have nothing left. So let's go. So he talks about the A major sonata, opus 101. He said Beethoven marked it allegro, but has superscribed in addition quickly, but not too much so, and with decision. For an accomplished player, now listen carefully, for an accomplished player, it is not impossible to play this passage as fast again as is meet. But can the listener be able to perceive and feel all the voices which form the polyphonic network? So in other words, Marx says here, okay, granted, you have gained so much technique that you can play that particular final movement of this Opus 101, double the tempo as it's meant to be played. But do you need to do that? Because if you play it so much faster, the polyphonic structure is lost. And by the way, guys, this is exactly the same thing as we have experienced with our symphony recordings. You know that we made 26 hours of podcast, a complete listening guide, guiding you through each and every movement of the symphony to guide you really in this new way of listening. That's something you get for free when you opt in for the full Beethoven experience. Go check it out on our website. Also there for 20% discount. But that's one of the major things that Alberto and I discovered, like the layers of rhythmical diversification and also polyphonic elements, like exactly Marx says, that are revealed when you play it slower, and it takes a while. When you play something slower at first, you don't feel anything. You have to just play it again and again and make it work. Do your job as a musician, I would say. And finally, after a while, it gets as a second nature. And there is a constant discovery. And that's what Marx here is talking about. If you speed it up twice compared to the correct tempo, and there we come to the crux, then you lose so much detail. But he continues. We will remember this Opus 101, but he continues. He is going to add some other pieces to that list. It remains therefore a necessity to confer with the whole in order to choose the tempo rightly. Such performers as are inclined, either through impetuosity or delight in remarkable representations, or urged on by pride in showing themselves eminent players, to exaggerate the tempo, have here particular assistance. So he's actually saying to people, like, if you want to just shine on stage and to show your dexterity and to show your eminence as performers, I have something for you to say here. And by the way, guys, this is still today valid. A virtuoso player today stands equal for how many numbers of notes you can play per second. That is just the case. You can be the most musical player, the most cantabile player, whatever, doesn't matter. If you cannot play fast, then you're not considered to be professional even. So nothing has changed from 1863. And that's the entire point. It's so true for today when people say, yeah, we have very early recordings, like go and check out the 1920 piano roll recordings. We will make a story about that. But even acoustical recordings, see how fast these people played, but they didn't keep a tradition. What you hear there in a 1930 recording is the 1930 tradition. Even if that person had lessons from Chopin, their intention was not to keep the tradition alive. Their intention was to make progress with something from the past, with something really new in the 19th century, with something that led to the invention of the metronome. That's why the first generation of metronome users, like Beethoven, embraced that metronome so much, because they saw that there was a disconnect between the composer and the performer. Mozart was his own performer. Nobody else played Mozart pieces in public. You wouldn't do that. Nobody else, well, in important public gatherings, it was Mozart, and he didn't play his pieces twice. The next time he had a new composition, but in Beethoven's time that changed. You had a generation of musicians that went on stage and that actually served a new audience as well. An audience that actually didn't have the tradition there anymore, like in Mozart's time, a few noblemen with a castle, and you had a concert and some operas, and the music was not for everyone. In Beethoven's time, that was a kind of democratization of art. We are past the French Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment. The individual was there. We own our own feelings, right? And so we still live in that time. We still, when you go on stage, it's about showing off. Even if the genuine intention of all musicians is to bring beauty, but that's an underlying element. It's so ingrained in our culture that we might not even be aware of that. But that's exactly what Marx is talking about. But then he continues. For such players, so the players that actually just want to show off with music, a rehearsal of the contents and character of the composition is useless. They are not willing to sacrifice their idiosyncrasy. Well, that's a difficult word for me. They act unconsciously. With such players, We must deal according to their own personal interest. And then, if you really, we must ask them, play the finales of the sonatas opus 26, 27 number 2, 53, 57 twice as fast as they ought to be played, do the sentences really become more brilliant? So, Marx says, the opus 101, the opus 26, the opus 27 number 2, that's the Moonlight, the opus 53, that's the Wildstein, the Prestissimo at the end, the 56, 57, those finales, why do you play them twice the speed that they ought to be played in? And now you can say, like, what is the correct speed according to Marx? Well, we have seen already before that he values the input of Karl Czerny, Hans van Bülow very highly. Well, we have editions by Karl Czerny. We have a pianoforte school by Czerny. We have no less than 4 sets of metronomizations by Czerny. The 4th one is not complete. We have a complete edition under the guidance of Hans van Bülow. And by the way, if you think that those metronome marks really differ a lot, they do not. So Czerny's metronomization is there. Hans van Bülow metronomization is there. And on page 67 or 68, Marx says in the footnote the following: it is well known that Beethoven's works were variously marked metronomically by later editors, Czerny and Moscheles. Such indications can, of course, only be considered as individual opinions of the editor, and ought therefore not to be accepted without test. And again, before you jump into the comment section and say, like, yeah, he's rejecting all these metronome marks, just like we do today, because there goes your story. No, he's not rejecting these metronome marks. First off, again, he values Czerny's input really highly, so that's not going to change in this footnote. But more importantly, he says you check these metronomizations, they are theirs, they're not wrong, they're not... Marx doesn't say they're impossibly fast, he just says you check them if they fit to your taste. That's something, again, that is of his time. The focus is on the individual. But the most important thing of this footnote is to remember that he doesn't reject them. And even more importantly, if those metronomizations by Czerny and Moscheles were understood by Marx as a single beat metronomization, he would most certainly have commented on these speeds as being an example of the modern practice of virtuosity. But he doesn't. He refers to them as 2 sources. And now we arrive where we want to be. If you're still here, thank you. It's great to have you here, and I know you're interested, and you won't regret being in this video so long. So what we're gonna do, we will take a single beat perspective. I will give you fragments of the Opus 101, the Opus 26, 27, number 2, and all the other pieces that Marx actually refers to, mentions in his book. I have Barenboim recordings and one by Valentina Lisitsa. I just took the first one that appeared on YouTube. It doesn't matter which recordings we take, guys. It really doesn't matter. This is going to be so much over the top of absurdity that it doesn't matter. Even if you find the Korean guy, just not mentioning anyone in particular, that plays super, 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 super fast, it doesn't matter. This will just prove to be like one of the most absurd consequences of single beat that you've ever heard. So I will give you the fragment. We will compare the tempi taken by Czerny, and then we go from there. So let's start Opus 54. I will give you a fragment of Daniel Barenboim's version of the last movement, Allegretto. There we go. So Barenboim plays in a tempo around 60 to 63. Czerny gives a tempo of half note 72. So Barenboim in his performance is like 10% under a single beat interpretation of this Allegretto. So let's first adjust Barenboim to single beat Czerny. There we go. And now we apply not the Fink doctrine as we did last time, but the Marx doctrine. That means there were persons in Marx's time that played this finale in double the tempo compared to what the tempo should be. Karl Czerny was a big source for him. There is no denial to the fact that he knew the metronomization by Czerny. He is referring to that in a footnote. I just want to repeat that. So Czerny for him was a valuable source. So you had people in his time that played this piece in double of that tempo. Again, from a single beat perspective. We keep that single beat perspective strictly. Then in Marx's time, 1863, the last movement of the Opus 54 sounded like this on stage. Okay, next piece, Opus 53, Waldstein, Finale Prestissimo. Here you have Lisitsa. So Lisitsa plays in whole note 72, Czerny marks 88, which is considerably faster. So let's speed Lisitsa's recording up to Czerny single beat. Same principle. The Marx doctrine, in that time, 1863, from a single beat perspective, that finale movement sounded on stage twice the tempo that the piece should be played in. Czerny was a reference for Marx, so twice the tempo of Karl Czerny sounds like this. Opus 27, number 2, Moonlight, Beerenboom. Here you have it, last movement. Beerenboom plays in single beat. Half note 88. Also Lisitsa actually matches the tempo in single beat. This is a movement that people can play in single beat. Czerny marks half note 80. In some sources, half note 92. Beerenboom is 88. So that's a single beat source. So I don't have to speed this piece up. So congratulations to Beerenboom. But it's not enough. Marx doctrine. Some people played it twice the required speed on stage in 1863. So that must have sounded like this. So next, Opus 26. Here's Beerenboom. Czerny marks 132 quarter note. Beerenboom is faster. So yes, single beat is sometimes possible. Beerenboom plays in half note 76. Congratulations to Beerenboom. I'm not going to slow this down because we need to apply the Marx doctrine. In 1863, from a single beat perspective, people, according to Marx, played this piece on stage like this. And finally, Opus 101, Beerenboom plays exactly Czerny's single beat. Here it is. But unfortunately, we know that it's not enough. In 1863, again, I don't need to repeat myself, this apparently sounded on stage like this. And now, the ultimate twist of the story, of course, is, for those of you who are longer here on our YouTube channel, you must remember I've made a video a few years back on a comparison between my Moonlight Sonata version, the Prestissimo, with that of Valentina Lisitsa. There was a video actually that took me just 2 hours to make because I didn't have time, and that blew up. Like, they had 100,000 views in 1 week. I will link it in the description box so you can check it out. But my version of the Prestissimo is exactly half of the tempo that Valentina Lisitsa takes. Also, Barenboim plays exactly in single beat. Again, this is a movement that people can play in single beat. And by the way, Czerny considers the Moonlight Sonata as to be a perfect piece for amateurs as to show their piano playing. You know, you can almost sight read that. Just think about that. Just think about this fact. But think about this as well. Lisitsa plays the Moonlight Sonata last movement in double the tempo that I took, and I took Czerny. It's exactly what Marx is saying. So if we change from single beat perspective to whole beat perspective, then my tempo is correct according to the metronomization, and Lisitsa plays that piece twice the tempo. If we take the 101 from whole beat perspective, then the version that Alberto recorded, and by the way, he is recording all Beethoven keyboard works right now. There will be 3 boxes of 10 CDs, 30 CDs, everything. Also the variations, and guys, the variations are mind-blowing. They are so beautiful, and the combinations with the sonatas, it's just, CD number 4 has been recorded this weekend. So yeah, we should find more time to inform you about all of that. We will have actually a section on the website, a now section, what we're doing now. It's so much going on. But Alberto played it in around half note 66, whole beat, half the tempo of Berenboim. From a whole beat perspective, Berenboim plays double the tempo required. It's possible. Also, the other pieces, yeah, they play still slower compared to a single beat interpretation, but in these slower movements, allegretto, not too much. So also there it works. The tempo we take, a whole beat tempo, gives room to speed it up almost twice. It's exactly what Marx actually describes. So the notion or the choice you have to make, if you read a source like Marx, and I also know that people will jump to the comment section and saying like, yeah, but we have sources here where he describes a metronome use, not here, but in other books written by Marx, very interesting, by the way. There is no doubt that a metronomization, a metronome is for him a single beat metronomization. There is no room for interpretation. Okay, I give you everything. So we go back to the double speed of Valentina Lisitsa, or do you want to double our performances? So which version do you take? And I don't mean which version do you like. I'm saying what is more likely to be the case. And there is only one answer to that. And there you have your answer. There is no proof to whole beat. Well, the context proves whole beat to be correct time after time. And this source is one of the strongest of all. So guys, from this moment onwards, every time you meet someone who says, okay, it's all nonsense, you just have to practice more. Well, you have to practice not a little more, you have to practice like 5 million years, because that's the time we will need as humans to evolve to something else, to have a more evolved nerve and muscular system, because we cannot do that. And so at the end of this video, I give you something else before you leave. Remember that video I made about Leonard Bernstein with his long rests in the Wagner Tristan? If you haven't seen it, check it out. For many people, this was like, for one reason or another, a very important video. I was listening in the recording session of last weekend to the Opus 7. That's a Beethoven sonata, E-flat major, the 4th sonata. You have this incredibly beautiful middle section, Largo in C major. It starts with just a simple chord progression. And then there are 6/8 rests. That's a Bernstein moment.
He writes,
which should take forever.
Should take, and that chord, and then there are 8 rests. 8 beats of rest at this tempo.
And you wait.
No one I've ever heard just do them. Wait that long. No one. I do. And the audience thinks I've died. Literally, they get very nervous and it's kind of squirming, or they think I've forgotten what the next phrase is, or something was supposed to happen that didn't happen.
Alberto and I were talking about how exactly the same impression. It lasts forever. But then when the next bar comes, right on time, and Czerny writes it in his Opus 500, don't play it too early. You have to be right on time because the audience needs to feel the takt, the beat, so to say. It's unbelievable. So, check our Beethoven symphonies out, 20% discount till this Friday. And if you see this video much later in the future, guys, it's still there. You still want to have that. Check it out. Link is in the description box. And also wait for these keyboard works because Beethoven. Can we agree on one thing? Let's be thankful that this guy left us so much music that still today resonates to our soul. We should not forget that. It's all about the music. Thanks for watching. We see each other soon again.